Athletor Podcast. Me and Joel Shaw are, and that's terrible English. Joel Shaw and I are joined today by one of my favorite human beings that's spinning on this rock with us. Lee Roper, thank you very much for coming on and imparting some wisdom on us, as you have a tendency to do. How's things going in Cedar Falls, America?
It's good, man. It's actually one of the very few times that there's not 50 million things going on. There's only about 10 million things going on. So you catch a few breaths right in this time. Freshmen are about to move in on campus, and then once that happens, hit the ground running. And then you're recruiting and training and doing all that again. So trying to catch a few breaths and catch up on some housework, stuff like that right now.
What would the average wrestling dad be interested to know about your job, right? Like you're an assistant coach at a major institution like you and I, it's wrestling. Like I remember talking to you when you first got the job, and one of the things that you loved about Cedar Falls is that wrestling is important at UNI. It is important, absolutely. Right? And so what would a coach from, I don't know, Georgia or Alabama, or what would they, or a dad from that area, what would they be surprised to know about your job and your life?
And you actually saying wrestling dad's probably what brought it to mind, but actually how much you have to play mom for the guys, and how many of those off the mat problems that you're really dealing with, and not really coming up with solutions for guys, because you want them to start growing up and coming up with them on their own, but trying to guide them through some of those things. And that is really probably the bulk of the job, helping guys navigate those situations that come up as you're a college student. It's not as on the mat as a lot of people think, or at least that's not the stressful part. That's the easier part. That's the vacation. That's the part all of us really enjoy. It's all the hours off the mat, trying to help guide these young men through their life, make good decisions, and navigate a really distracting, difficult time.
Do you think, do you think that that's true at every institution? Like, do you think Kale has to worry about that type of stuff, or maybe worry is not the best, concern himself with that type of stuff? Do you think that, or maybe not Kale, but Cody and Casey and those guys, or Terry Brands down the street from you in Iowa City, or I guess any of the assistants at Oklahoma State, or do you think that it's pretty across the board for a Division I coach to have to play mom?
Well, yeah. I mean, somebody has to. So take the athletes that you work with, right? Do they have problems? Do you have those off the mat moments? Those don't go away. They're in every single person's life. Whether you're an 8-year-old wrestling, boy or girl, or you're 28-year-old wrestling, man or woman, you have problems in life that are going to it's going to hurt your athletic performance, or that are confusing, or going to help your athletic performance. You have to navigate those things. So I don't know if it's Casey or Kale or whatever coach you want to point it at, but somebody has to help. Those problems exist. So yes, there has to be a mom involved. That's why it takes so many people to run a program too. There's a lot of jobs to do.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you said was kind of how important wrestling is to the school. How do you guys go about keeping that relevance kind of on a day-to-day basis?
That's the cool thing about being in Iowa. And I've always tried to explain it to people, because I mean, I'm from Georgia originally, and it's still not lost on me, even though I've been here 9 years now. I'm still used to walking around the grocery store and people see a weird ear and they're like, what's up with you? What's wrong with you? And it's just understood here. And you really don't have to do much. It's everybody has a touch with wrestling, whether it's a very close touch or somebody in their family had one. They know somebody in their life very closely that had a very deep experience with wrestling. So just kind of what we all understand talking here that are in their fraternity, people have a closer touch to that wrestling fraternity here. So you feel a little bit closer into it. So to answer your question, Joel, we really don't have to do much. The history speaks for itself. And this is one of the birthplaces of the sport, specifically right where I'm at in Waterloo, Iowa. There's Olympic champs have been born here. Dan Gable was born here, and just all the history that goes into that. So we just get to be a part of the history, and all you've got to do is celebrate it. So that's what we try and do. We try and celebrate the history and hopefully one day become a part of it. And some young coach will be talking about that old bald man that coached at UNI 50 years later, and they're flying around in cars, whatever they're doing in the future.
You say you don't have to do much, and I think you're being truthful and honest, but the cool thing to me is you really don't have to, right? It's on the walls in
Absolutely.
West Gym. It's like, I don't know if I brought this up on this podcast at all, but I know I've spoke about it, and you and I have spoken about it quite a bit, Lee. My son went to preseason nationals, which is in Cedar Falls, but we flew into Des Moines and we drove to Iowa City and we checked out Carver Hawkeye and all that stuff, and it's wonderful. And before you actually walk into the room at Carver Hawkeye Arena, into the wrestling room, there's a touchscreen, and you can go through all of the NCAA championship teams and All-Americans and Big Ten champs and blah 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 blah. You can kind of sift through that. So it's like their achievement board, but it's in digital form, and that's cool, and it's interesting. It's interactive, right? So that's cool. And Jack, my son, loved that, and I got to meet Spencer Lee, and that was kind of cool. And then we went into West Gym, and there's pictures of Tony Davis on the walls, and there's pictures of Taylor Lujan on the walls. And when we sat down for dinner that night, he and I remember saying, well, which place did you like better? He's like, well, I liked West Gym better. Now, for those of you that have not been to West Gym, it's got character.
It's 100 years old.
It's 100 years old.
It's a 100-year-old building.
It's a 100-year-old building. And when the heat comes on, you hear it, and it clanks, and you
couldn't have said it any better. When the heat comes on, you hear it. That describes the building right there. That's got a lot of character to it. Exactly.
It does. It rattles. Yeah. It's like, I remember doing interviews in the bleachers there, going, "Would somebody shut that fucking thing on?" You know what I mean? So yeah. But I asked my son which he liked better. And he said West Gym, and I said, well, why? And he's like, well, when you go to Carver Hawkeye, you can see the history, and that's cool. It's nice to see it. But when you walk into West Gym, boy, you feel the history, and that's a different thing. And it's probably one of the more poignant things that young man has said to me. And it was kind of cool to hear. How do you cultivate that into, as a coach, getting kids, because it's really like not many kids are gonna feel that every time. They're gonna be taken aback by the shiny lights of and all the bells and whistles that Carver Hawkeye has to offer. How do you cultivate that into a selling point to a young man or that's looking to come and wrestle at UNI?
Well, a little bit of that, Mike. It's the culture, and when you were telling me about that, man, that really did. It made me feel good. It brought a lot of pride, and the coaches have been there longer than me. I'm sure it would with them too. And it goes back to who the boss is. It's Doug, and you know Doug pretty well too. Doug's not a bells and whistles kind of guy. That's not him. He is a person to person, sit down, have a conversation and relationship. Something that he keeps telling me, and I keep forgetting quite often. It's not what you do; it's how you make people feel that they remember. And that's what we try and do. So when you come in and somebody feels something in the room, well, they feel that history. Why? Because they're getting interacted with everybody that's in that room. And everybody that's in the room knows the history because we celebrate it and talk about it all the time. The people that are up on the walls, we get them to come back and visit. They talk to the guys before practice. Our guys are going to develop some kind of relationship with them. So then as your son comes through and interacts with the athletes on the team, well, again, Doug really stresses that face-to-face, person-to-person, shake their hand, look them in the eye, get to know them kind of relationship. So as they move through the room and they have those interactions with each individual or coach or whoever's in there, a little bit of that culture is going to rub off because when you're in the room every day, it kind of becomes part of who you are. So, man, I love it that he was able to feel that. And how are you going to feel it? Well, there's not energy floating around the air, I don't think. I don't know a whole lot, but I think that just comes from the people you meet. The people you meet in there make you feel a certain thing. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to celebrate the history we have, because that's one thing we do have at UNI. We have a practice room that people have been practicing and trying to win NCAA titles in for 100 years. How many places have that?
Not many. Not many. Dude, the fact that y'all aren't going to have dual meets there anymore it hurts my soul, because I got to tell you something. And I know when Nomad was still at Flow, he wrote about it. He wrote an article saying, it's bucket list shit. Like it's literally like Joel Shaw grew up in California, went to Cal Poly, and like it's cool, right? He wrestled for Cal Poly, and now he goes back to the dual meets, and I'm there calling the matches and stuff like that. It's having a real dual meet at West Gym. I've never felt anything like it. Like, everyone's on top of you.
Absolutely.
It's 100 degrees in there, and it's deafening. Deafening. Who did I see? I saw y'all wrestle Nebraska, and I think it was Schwarm got a fall. Does that make sense?
If Schwarm's out there, you got a good chance of somebody getting credit and pins. So probably was. Yeah.
And it was like, it was the first match of the night. I'm telling you, I can still feel it. Like, it got hotter as the referee hit the mat. Like, I'm literally getting hit in the head with people's breath. Like, it was. Talk a little bit about what it was like the first time you experienced that.
Oh man, you want to talk about like bucket list things? I could die a happy man after that, because you know me, man. I'm a wrestling nerd, and really one of the things I'm trying to do in my life is stack up as many cool wrestling experiences as I can. This is it's who I am, man. I'm going to do this as long as I'm breathing, unless I get kicked out of it. So I think it was the first really one I felt was against Missouri. And I don't remember the details of it. It'd make a better story if it did. But Doug was trying to tell me something to go tell one of the guys that was in the wrestling room warming up. And I'm not kidding, maybe 3 feet away. And I saw his mouth moving, and I know words were coming out, but they did not make them to me. It was just so loud, the crowd in there. I couldn't hear what he was telling me after the match. So that was one of those things where you're walking out and you kind of look around and go, man, this is really cool. It's really cool to be a part of that and get to feel that energy. And I'm not one of those people that feels a whole lot. And being in a crowd like that, you can feel it because our fans are so knowledgeable. And it is sad, man. We're not going to get to wrestle in West Gym anymore, but everything comes to an end, right? So now it's up to us to bring the spirit of West Gym to wherever we end up competing the most. And the cool part is the fans bring most of it. So when they come over and they're loud and rowdy, no matter where we wrestle, it can be anywhere. You put us in a barn in the middle of nowhere. If you build it, they will come. It's not too far from here, right? We go wrestle in a cornfield, and hopefully it'll be the same energy. So we're thinking about ways that we can celebrate West Gym as that building moves into whatever phase it goes into. The university still trying to figure out some of that themselves too. But man, I can promise you, knowing Doug and the part I can play in it too, that the West Gym will be celebrated. It is not going to be one of those things that gets pushed off. West Gym will always be a part of UNI wrestling, whether it's West Gym 2.0 and building a new facility, it'll be celebrated in some way because it is a part of what UNI is. Like you said, not very many people have a place where you wrestle has a name, and like Rec Hall, and people know it. West Gym, people know it. So that's something we've got to keep going because that is a competitive advantage for us. That's something that we talk to recruits about. So that's not going to go away.
Yeah, no, it's I believe you. I didn't think that it would. All right, let's turn the conversation a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me your thoughts on NIL.
Oh man.
I'm just gonna push that ball and give it to you and let you run with it.
Yeah, honestly, I've taken that ball and I've turned it about every single way that I can. And honestly, I don't know how to handle that situation except, man, get a whole lot of resources. Because that genie's not going back in the bottle. It's not. It's here to stay. These athletes are going to turn more into employees for the school. But unfortunately, what's happening right now, and Mike, we've talked about this a lot. The economics in wrestling are terrible. Well, it's even getting any worse because this is all based on charity. Somebody is just donating money because they love a program, right? Very few programs have actual real financial value. They're generating revenue, sustainable revenue. So some just very generous booster and donors going, yes, I love this program. Here's a check. And then guess what they have to do next year? Yes, I love this program. Here's a check. So now the NIL is just.
But I have. I'm sorry. Hold on a second.
Go ahead.
I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think that the person that we were talking about earlier, the person in Middle America that doesn't maybe have their whole body and their whole brain engulfed in wrestling and the economics of the sport, I think that they're going to pass by what you just said as a just a commonality. Okay, it's not something that you can be passed by. It's not something that can be flippantly just passed by. We have to that's a big deal. The economics of the sport are broken.
Oh, absolutely.
They're broken.
I'll talk ad nauseum on that. And something that we really, you guys ask a question, right? And probably get asked the same thing. If you could change one thing about wrestling, what would you do? And my thing would be like, everything else that this gets discussed, if it's not green and it doesn't have a dollar sign with it, we need to quit talking about it. The problem in wrestling is resources and money. Whether you're trying to create a professional league to generate money, or teams are trying to be in the black so they're not in the red, being a detriment to their athletic programs, to clubs, the private clubs making money, it's a resource problem. And until we just get rid of everything else, the rules don't matter. The fans do matter because that generates money. The eyeballs matter because that generates money. But this all boils down to dollars and cents. And that's what we have to start talking about if we want to turn the ship around or pull it out of the grave or whatever you think. Some people think wrestling's in a good spot. And I think it's in a pretty precarious one right now because we're kind of ignoring the problem. And it's money. Money's the problem.
Yeah, I think that's an easy thing for lots of people to ignore when you see college football and college basketball and you see the big money that goes into that. And people just assume that all college sports are lumped into that huge pool of money.
Yeah, and that's and it used to be, but now as things have changed and the NCAA is really changing, and it's going to change even more in the next 5 years, you're not lumped into that money anymore. Everybody has more discretion where the money goes. So even going back to that Middle America booster and donor you were talking about, Mike, now for the first time ever, they have a way to circumvent that money going to the school. They can go directly to whatever athlete they want and just say, you know what? I don't know where these dollars go when I write a check to whatever scholarship foundation for whatever school they're at, it goes to. When I give this check to this athlete, I know exactly where it's going to, which is a good thing too. But it's new and it's the wild, wild west. So it's going to take a while to get things figured out and what regulations need to happen and what pitfalls are there. So I'm just trying to be patient and learn and talk to people a lot smarter than me about this NIL thing. And I'm an assistant coach, so there's not a whole lot I can really do about it too, other than learn and then answer questions and give opinions whenever it's asked of me. But it's something that I think is pretty dangerous because it's something else that's going to think about it being like a leech or a tick, and the blood inside the organisms getting sucked out by something else. So you have the RTC, which sucks resources out, and now you've got NIL on top of that sucks resources out of this thing that makes wrestling move. And for me, what is that? I think it's NCAA wrestling. I think that's like the organism that keeps everything moving. Olympic wrestling, youth wrestling, at all. NCAA wrestling at whatever level, that is the target for most people, to get an education, move on with their life, or to win national titles too. That's what most people are aiming for when they're really trying to be competitive in wrestling and move up. And we just got too many things that are just sucking the blood out of that organism. It's starting to get a little bit sick. We got to start taking some of those leeches or ticks off, or figure out a way to get more sustainable resources coming in, because I think there's more blood going out than blood going in, and that's not sustainable. You can't compete in nonprofit. It's just, I don't know much about economics, but I know that's a tricky thing to do. 501c3s competing, that's tough. That's a hard thing.
Right, because how do you know when you won?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Which is what's happened a lot too. Listen, Mike, you know most of these coaches too. You're talking about the most competitive people on the planet.
Yep.
I mean, they'll race in the parking lot to be the first one leaving the tournament. So we just got this thing where we've got to find another way. And if you can build a bigger locker room for more recruits, all right, let's do it. Or if we can raise more money for this RTC, okay, let's do it. And then it just becomes more and more and more. And eventually more is too much, it becomes unhealthy.
Someone said to me, and what I think is interesting is, like, Joel, you mentioned football and basketball, and you kind of held them up, or not just you, but people that watch football on Saturdays. They look at places like LSU, places like Alabama, places like, give it a name, even, Iowa, right? Like, they're filling that stadium, and they look at it like it's this impenetrable kind of thing. And I think that college sports in general can be such a house of cards that if we're not careful, if we're not deliberate, if we're not mindful, a very wise man sat down with me one time and said, how we, and maybe I'll do it in the accent, maybe you'll know exactly who I'm talking about.
I've had a similar conversation with him, so I think I know where you're going and who you're talking about.
He'd go, you look at these things like the Coliseum. You think they ever thought that was ever going to be in ruins? No. And you look at these stadiums that college football has built. 100 years from now, there's a good chance that we're looking at them 1,000 years from now, like they're the Coliseum, and telling our grandkids, yeah, they used to play a game in there.
Yep.
With
taking
hit each other,
taking selfies at the Rose Bowl,
right?
Where parts of the bowl are cracked and the stadium's eroded. No, man, you definitely could see it.
It sounds post-apocalyptic, but
yeah,
I think it's not to be all doom and gloom, but it's a house of cards, man. And if we don't start generating money in some way, it's never going to move in a better direction.
Yeah, and the good thing is, though, we're not very big, so getting things moving is actually not as tough as it would be to make some changes. And, like, let's say college basketball, huge changes going on in college basketball. Well, man, that's a huge sport. So many colleges, so many schools, so many athletes. It's gigantic. So getting that gigantic Titanic turning in the ocean, that's a lot harder. We're a little bit more of a speedboat. And that's another thing I think we need to accept too. Like, man, our mortgage, the house we borrowed, our mortgage, we can't afford it, man. We're trying to act like these bigger sports. We are broke, and we need to start acting like it too. But we're also pretty small, so we can move and be flexible with things. And also, I think the NCAA getting out of regulation as much is going to give wrestling the opportunity to do some pretty neat things. If we have people that are thinking outside the box, and the leadership's going to be so important in the next 5 years, I think, for the health and the direction wrestling moves into. I think it's going to be a fun time to see things get set in motion. Because again, my man, it's competitive people. Wrestlers don't die easily. This sport's not going anywhere because they'll have to kill all of us for it to happen.
That's right.
But it's going to be some neat changes that come in 5 years. And are there going to be some growing pains with it? Absolutely. There's going to be a whole lot of get off my lawn, I miss the old days. Absolutely. There's going to be a lot of that too. That's just what I'm trying to do, especially with NIL stuff. It's try and fight that mentality as much as possible, because you either learn how to use the changes to your advantage and make them positives, or they're going to drown you.
Or
so you can't just be like, I hate this stuff, I wish it would go back to the way it was. Well, it's not. So you have to live in the real world and the situation you're in, and just so many new things are coming in. It's like, man, I don't know how to juggle these balls yet. What's been
the hardest thing to adjust to?
Probably the NIL for us. That's probably been the toughest one. At least that's gotten the most conversations, to where it's like, well, man, I got to think about this a little bit more. And I'm telling you, I don't want to steal his thunder, and I know he's still working about it. Doug's got an incredible idea what he wants to do, and how he feels good about still teaching some really good life lessons with NIL money. And he'll talk about it at some point if he ends up moving with it. But there's still just a lot of like, I'm not sure yet. So that's been the toughest one for us. It's And because a certain extent, even though it's not supposed to be pay for play, yeah, nod and
Come
wink.
on,
Well, again,
man.
yeah, right.
We talked to
We,
Damien about it. That's nonsense. It is. It is pay for
yeah,
play. You know it is.
and he talked about it in a good way. I like the way he described it. I won't rehash all that too, but that's the thing that hurt us because, okay, if it does come down, some schools kind of have unlimited scholarship dollars to a certain extent now, and there's going to be a handful of schools, and it's the majority of schools that aren't in that bucket.
That's right.
So now we are getting some silos.
But that's the thing. People don't realize it's 90% of the schools are not
absolutely.
It's Penn State, it's Iowa, it's Oklahoma State, it's maybe two more, maybe Ohio State, maybe Minnesota, right? I mean, but aside from that, there's really not any other schools that have the unlimited resources that those 5-7 schools do.
And I wouldn't even say those are unlimited too, because I mean, this experiment's only been done for a short amount of time. That, I mean,
yeah,
that well's going to dry up.
Finite. It's got to be finite.
Because you know what goes in with that. There's going to be some, because you got to look at it kind of like a business deal. That's what an NIL deal is. So some of those are going to go poorly, and it's going to burn some donors. Going to be like, nope, I'm out. I'm not doing that again. That was a terrible experience. So you got that well of check dried up. So, man, I don't think anybody's in that. I've got this infinite pool of money, and I can just keep throwing bad money to keep getting guys. So I think it's going to calm down a little bit. The newness of it, right? It's like the new phone comes out. Everybody's got to go get it. So there's this new toy that all these really competitive coaches get to play with to try and find an advantage. And that's what you're seeing going on a lot right now. And most coaches that are really trying to win are trying to figure out how they can play with this new toy and be an advantage at every single one of their schools. You're going to see some really creative ideas come out, man. There's some smart people out there and definitely some dedicated coaches. I can't wait to see some of the ideas that stem from this. Like I said, Doug's got a great one, man. I wish I could talk about it because the more I thought about it, it's a really smart idea. I'll tell you offline, Mike, you'll like it. It's a good one.
Do you think that NIL is a net positive or net negative for the sport of wrestling?
Guessing, I'm going to say it's a net negative, but I'm guessing. We really don't know yet. Again, the experiment's real young, but I just don't see any other way it's not going to create. We're just watching a few teams really be competitive, and everybody else is trying to sprint and catch up to them. So over the long term, I think you're going to see a lot of the resources kind of get pulled to those few schools we were talking about. They're just they've got too many avenues to get them right now. But then from that, you get the David and Goliath situation, and you're going to find some smaller teams get creative and figure out how to be competitive in the situation they have. Nobody's going to lay down on this thing. So I think it's too early to really cast judgment on it, because then I feel like I'd be jumping in that get off my lawn, and I'm really fighting that because it's in me, man. I promise you, it's there. I want to be the get off my lawn guy so hard.
Curmudgeon so bad.
So bad. It's in there. And I've got my wife on the get off my lawn watch. When she hears me talking that, she gets to wag her finger at me and be like, "You're getting so old." Like, be open-minded. So I'm trying, man. I really am. And if anybody out there feels really positive about it, like, get in touch with me, man. I want to talk to some people that are like, man, this NIL thing's great. This is what we're doing with it. But everybody I talk to, you see that eye roll, and it's like, God, negative, negative, negative. So I think it's going to be net negative right now.
Right. So, okay. But in the comments section, it's going to be, well, these kids have been taken advantage of for so long.
Which is true. Well, there's some truth to that. I mean, we can't deny that
problem.
Too.
That's
absolutely.
kind of the problem, is that there is a, if you talk to guys like Andrew Spey, he'll say that the education that whether it's paid for or you get some type of monetary value from the education that's been provided to student athletes over the course of the last few decades. And he'll place so much more value on that than a lot of people would. So that, he's kind of like one end of the spectrum. I use Spey because I remember having these conversations. He's like, dude, I don't, he's like, these kids get an education. Like, that's a big deal. And he's right. But someone else, an institution was profiting off of minors at certain points, right? Or kids, and not compensating them in any monetary fashion. So now it opens the door. But like you said, there's just too many leeches on the arm of the sport, right? Because, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, okay, in 2003, before Zeke Jones started the RTC program, you could go to a donor and say, I need money, and they would write you a check, and it would get dispersed, hopefully throughout the entire wrestling team, sometimes throughout the entire athletic department. But now you have to go back to that donor twice in the same year.
Right.
Three times in the same year.
Yeah, you're starting to get the problem now, man. You've voiced it a really good way. You're having to go and police that donor more than once now. You're exactly right.
3 times, not twice now. Not twice now, because having a competitive RTC was an absolute thing for a long time.
It is. Still is.
It's I would argue it's less is important now.
It's definitely changing.
Right, but it's certainly a thing, right? But now you also have to go back and say, look, there's a high school kid that we are talking to that has offers on the table for $500,000, and this kid hasn't stepped foot in an NCAA arena yet.
That's crazy, isn't it?
It's truthful.
Yeah, I believe it.
I know, like Joel and I talk about this stuff a lot.
Yeah.
And while we hear the numbers that, like, let's talk about Gable for a second. Gable Stevenson, I've heard, and this is going to be complete conjecture, I don't know this. I've heard $2 million for him to wear your singlet. I don't know if that's true. I do have a very close relationship with some high school athletes around the country, and they're telling me $500,000 before they even walk in the door. These are real numbers.
Well, one, good for them. That's great. And it's not bad on the athlete. I mean, it's not good for them. And to go back to what you said, I don't think any of us, look at it, name, image, and likeness, right? I don't want to live in a world where a kid doesn't own their name, image, and likeness at any point in their life.
For sure.
I mean, that's your name, that's your image. You should be able to, especially when you get to that 22, 21 years old, I think back to that age and I was nowhere near an adult, but we treat them like adults, right? They're supposed to be able to make those decisions. So they should be able to do what they want with it. But what we need to be doing in this, and it goes back to the money problem again, and be like, let's just go $500,000 check that you said. Is that a good check? And how do we evaluate whether that is a good decision or not? Because right now we're evaluating on it whether the athlete says yes or no, correct? Well, that's not a good metric for the evaluation, because I could go out and get a salesman to say, yes, you can buy this car by paying $5,000 extra over the asking price, right? That's a poor decision for me. And that's what's happening a lot right now. And again, the problem with the sport is lack of resources, right? And every cent that we waste, man, it's even more detrimental. So we just need to be really thinking about, is this a smart way for me to use this money? What actually is the value? There is some value there. I mean, I'm not going to be naive and say, there's no value to get the athlete, but what is the number? And I don't know 100%. I haven't really sat down and really thought about it from an actuarial standpoint, but I know it's not $500,000. That's not it. That's especially for a high school kid. They're not going to bring $500,000 of value to a college program. And now we're not operating an LLC, a for-profit business, so it doesn't have to be dollar for dollar, but it can't be this $500,000 whole deficit. So let's say they're worth $25,000. You got $475,000 deficit on that check. That's not smart.
Well, when you stack
up so many not smart decisions, everything's going to get unhealthy. And we got to make smarter decisions about where those resources are going, even when you have them to spend. Even when you have it, and be like, man, make sure you're not wasting that money, because it's not unlimited for anyone.
When we're talking about resources and how sometimes the economics aren't lining, or not sometimes, but lots of times the economics of running a wrestling program don't necessarily add up to being overly profitable. How do you find a way to infuse resources into the sport of wrestling that economics already don't line up, while also trying to be able to compensate athletes along the way?
Well, I think the first step is the hardest one. So generating more money is always difficult. I think some of the money that's used has to be let go. I mean, salaries keep increasing, right? Well, at some point, well, that's a bad decision too. Like, okay, this coach doesn't bring
Sean
$750,000 worth of value to the college.
Sean Burnett looked me in the eye when in 2020 he goes, I was just wondering when the bubble was going to burst anyway. My salary keeps on going up. I'm doing nothing different. So at what point he sat there and looked at me and goes, I kind of, it's fine. Totally fine. Yeah, makes sense.
And we just can't keep getting in. Okay, this wrestling room was $3 million. Now the next one has to be $4 million. And the next one has to be $5 million. That doesn't make a better product to put on the mat, to bring more fans around, and more fans around, more eyeballs brings more money. So the first thing we've got to do is actually use the resources we have, because we already have resources. Forget about getting new resources. That's harder. Let's do better with the resources we have already. Let's take what we have. And wrestling's, man, there's a lot of really good things going on in the sport. Let's take what we have and make it really healthy and sustainable. And once we get this thing sustainable and it can live on its own, then we allow it to grow. We've got this little baby that can't take care of itself when you're not have your hands on it all the time, and we're trying to make it bigger and grow. Man, it's just going to be reckless and it's going to fall apart. We've got to get the small product we have really sustainable and allow that to grow more naturally. So I don't think it's more money. I think that's a pretty naive way to go about it. We've got resources. We just have to be a lot smarter with them. And I'm not in a decision where you make those, and I'm not knowledgeable about that aspect about how to use those resources in a program. I don't have any experience with that. I've been on the mat working with guys trying to get them prepared to win college wrestling matches and guide them through their life. The financial aspect, I just don't have as much as much experience with that like a head coach would. Yeah, that's the one that's really organizing it. But it being a part of it, you get some ideas and you can see some of the problems, but man, we just got to be smarter with the money we have. I think that's the first step of it.
Lee, you say that, and I don't accept it because I think you have a better understanding than most people that are head coaches and do have to balance the checkbook.
Yeah, and that might be true, but okay, I'm not in a position to make any kind of decisions on it. So I don't want to be Don Quixote tilting at windmills outside, man. I just don't. It's going to be a waste of my time to really put that much thought into so I haven't gone that deep with it and really be like, what would I do? I've got this budget. What would I do with the budget? And your budget's all the money you raise in a calendar year. That's what your budget is, from the school to scholarships to RTC to outside donors. And I don't have a very good grasp of all that. So even if I did have a good grasp of it, I'm not in a position to make those decisions. So now I'm just on Twitter yelling and screaming about things that won't change anything. And I don't want to get in that business. I don't. It's not productive. And more than that, it's not productive for my own mental health.
Right. It's not. It's a bad road to go down. Mm-hmm. Because it gets scary. It gets scary quickly. Joel, what would you do? You are I don't know. As I'm sitting here, I think you might have some ideas, Joel.
Oh, you're gonna put me on the spot?
Yeah, dude. Because you're actually a really smart dude. You know, my name's on the stupid description, but you're the brains behind this organization. How would you differently allocate the funds that a place like UNI or even Penn State has?
I mean, I think if parity is what we're looking for across the NCAA, there needs to be some sort of salary cap. And it seems like there's a large pool of money in college sports in general. And if you look at all of the major sports organizations, the NFL, the NBA, they're pretty competitive because teams can only spend so much. And the league itself takes in a big pool of money. The league negotiates their TV rights and then disperses money to all of the different teams or franchises.
Hmm.
So if you're really looking for parity, that would be my best guess. But
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's a great idea, like a spending limit for what you could have, and then really open up that can of worms. And it's like, okay, regulation. That's the biggest hurdle with that. How do we regulate it, and who is going to regulate it, and what is and the NCAA is not going to regulate it. They're not. They're not going to they're out of that business, and they want to even pull out of it even more. So is it the National Wrestling Coaches Association, or do we have to form something, a wrestling financial coaches association, whatever it end up calling it? The regulation of what that spending limit is for wrestling would have to be it, because what might happen for NCAA is, okay, there's a spending limit on the school. Well, then we're back in the same problem again, right? Getting out resources allocated specifically for wrestling into that lane. But I like the spending limit idea. My dad and I actually talked about that when I was home visiting him. He thinks that's the way a lot of the Power 5 football teams are going to have to get back to that parity thing you're talking about. Or there's just not going to be parity, and few teams are going to win every single year.
Which is kind of what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's literally been the case of this sport for the last 100 years.
And then we've got the problem too with a lot of the coaches are the one making the decisions too. So you have people that are trying to do the opposite of parity. That's our job as a coach, right? We don't want parity. We want the odds stacked in our favor. We're the one making the decisions for parity. Well, that's not going to happen. You have to have a different governing body that says, I know coaches, you're not going to like what we're about to do, but sorry, here's the regulation you have to go by. Because and I don't think it would be fair to ask a coach to make a decision to handicap themselves, to shoot themselves in their own foot. Why in the world would we ask them to do that? It's not very smart.
They'll never do it either. And they'll never do it.
No way. So I think to get back into it a little bit, I don't even think it's inside the NCAA. We've got to monetize the highest level of the sport. We've got to, and this is tough because, man, you want to talk about get off my lawn and its roots. We have to move away from the ultimate goal being world and Olympic championship. The ultimate goal should be whatever, the Nabisco wrestling belt, right? And that is what the highest level of the sport is, like winning the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
It is a business in and of itself. So I really think we need to monetize the highest end of the sport. And then we've got the whole problem with the highest end of the sport. Wrestle's a different style than NCAA's in, and that's not viewed as much. So right away, it can't generate as much revenue. There's a lot of obstacles, and there's a lot of nuanced problems, and there's not enough people to help start solving those problems. Because what happens again, those people that are solving the problems, you have to pay them. I mean, no, this is a lot of work for somebody to volunteer and do, and then we're back in the same hole. Well, where do we get the resources to pay those people to solve the resources problem?
And that's why it actually makes me laugh. Like, it makes me chuckle when people are like, we should just start a pro league. I'm like, oh, okay. I'll never forget, and I hope that this person is listening, and I won't call him out by name, but he knows exactly who it is. And it's a guy that I was coaching with in Texas, and he may or may not have dipped into some of the wine that I had, and he was good and drunk, and he was screaming at me in my kitchen that all we needed to do was start a dual meet pro league. And I was like, you mean like real pro wrestling? He's like, what's that? I'm like, exactly. Yeah. It's like, you guys, what are you talking about? I'm like, you don't even like he thought it out. Like, he really thought that he nailed it. And God bless him. I'm sure he really meant what he said, but he had no idea what he was talking about. He had no idea what he was talking about. He's like, no, we put it in places like Cedar Falls where it's really important. I go, okay, when do we have, at what time of the year do we do this? He's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you've thought it through. What time of the year? I'm like, scheduling. That's your first hurdle. And that's like a small hurdle, right? You're not even talking about delving into the minutia of the actual economy of this league that you're talking about. Because the economy, how do you get people there? Like that, you haven't even talked about that. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So The other problem is we don't have time in the calendar. We're going to have to create another month, right? Because there's not a time where we're all, barring the 2 weeks that you're talking about between Fargo and the kids coming in, the freshmen moving into their dorms. That's a 2-week window that we have open every year, and there's not another one. So when do we do it? So right. I think while we're not going to sit here and solve the wrestling world's problems on this podcast, although I'd love to do it.
It's fun to hypothesize about it.
Right. But I do truly believe that putting our finger on the problems is important too. Yes.
Oh, definitely. And I think we've all got to move to cheaper real estate. We've got to understand that this is still really grassroots, man. We can't live in Malibu right now. We can't afford it. We can't afford that. So again, it just goes back to doing better with the resources we have. And that's everybody that's involved in the sport, that's in the decision making. You have to look at those resources you have and realize how valuable those are. And is what I'm doing with those resources sustainable? And I think until it comes down to an individual level and everybody's got, I'm even talking about like the guy that runs a youth club in the North Georgia mountains, right? He's not dealing with millions and millions of dollars. His budget might be 10 grand for the whole year. That's what he raises for the whole youth club. And that would be on the high end of things for a lot of youth clubs too. Those dollars are valuable because they come into the sport, and you need to steward those dollars as well as with as much care that we steward our athletes with. I mean, we know we take care of those athletes and we want them to move this thing as healthy as we can. And that's hard enough to do. This crazy sport we're in that, man, can really chew you up, getting our athletes through this healthy. We got to look at the money like that too. We have to take just as much care of those dollars. We can't be wasteful with them, whether you've got a $5,000 budget or a $5 million budget.
Joel, you got anything before we go?
No, let's take it home.
Okay.
I was gonna say we could do a magic wand, but he already answered that.
He did, but I got one for him. Don't you fret. Who's on the Mount Rushmore of wrestling?
Oh, I need is this just the United States or the whole world?
Well, I mean, it's just in the United States.
Okay.
There's not one. There's
oh,
not
yeah,
one.
Duh. There's no Mount Rushmore.
I mean, you know.
Yeah, come on. This is the way my brain works. I should have done that. Okay. So the first one I'm going to put on is Gable. Everything kind of stems from him. He's got to go up there first for me. Man, he just Sports Illustrated cover, man. If you talk to somebody about wrestling and they're a casual fan and you bring up Dan Gable, like, oh yeah, I've heard of that guy. So he goes on for me. John Smith is probably my next one. There's very few wrestlers that have changed the way wrestling looks by them being a competitor. Wrestling looked different when John Smith was competing. Just go watch film during that time, and everybody was trying to be John Smith, and plus 6 world titles and all that, right? It goes without speaking. Kale. Actually, I'm gonna go Burroughs next because I'm gonna put Kale on the bookend. So, Burroughs goes up next because credential-wise, I mean, arguably he's one of the greats. He's definitely up on Mount Rushmore for me, and he revolutionized and revitalized. That's the word I was looking for. United States wrestling. I mean, it was a little bit of a desert for a while, and here comes this guy and really changed the face of it. He's got to go up there just for that alone. Let's say he didn't win as much, take away a few medals, I still goes up there for me for just bringing some health back into the Olympic level wrestling for senior level men. And then I probably got to go Kale for what he did as a competitor and now what he's doing as a coach. The same thing, kind of bookending. He's a modern day Gable. It's kind of the way to look at it. What he did, very similar path, short international career, but did it at the highest level, won all you could win. And then what he's doing on the coaching end of things. And it's just modernizing the sport a whole lot. I would have to put him up there for that. But then you start thinking, okay, women's wrestling's really building up too. So man, I got to probably put a woman in there at some point. So you got to throw Adeline in consideration. You have to throw Helen Maroulis in there too, because my opinion, those are the two women's goats right now. And that's going to keep added as these young stars keep coming up. So
Yeah.
but who do you
these-
take
these
off?
young
Who do you
girls
take
are-
off to put Adeline or Helen up there? So that's where it just starts getting tough. But all that's in consideration. Those 6 people go up. But I would go Gable, John Smith, Burroughs, Kale. That'd be my
Yeah.
Mount Rushmore if you put a gun to my head and make me carve it.
Love it. Love it. Lee Roper, how do people get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you?
Roper 165, anything on social, or just go to a wrestling tournament. You got a chance, I'll probably be there.
Loved it. Loved it. Thank you so much for coming on, brother. I appreciate you.
Absolutely enjoyed it, guys.